You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
A word about Pelé. I don't think it's possible to compare footballers of different eras, as everybody tries to do. You know, was he better than Maradona or Cruyff or whatever? I tell you what I was thinking in the light of my memories of him when I was a teenager, is I think he was the most charismatic footballer. Whenever you saw Pelé play, he appeared to radiate joy in a way that not many footballers do.
Precisely.
You know? And that's what I thought.
And also, a kind of didn't appear to be remotely self-obsessed. I mean, it was an era when it was less about you and your personal gain and the profit you can make out of it all. But the comparison between him and, say, Cristiano Ronaldo, everyone has said, you know, this is a man who radiated a kind of selflessness, you know, on the pitch, a joy and enthusiasm about the game, and was just there was not a single person who met him who wasn't just bowled over and didn't adore him.
And I tell you what, the other thing is that people like Cruyff and Maradona were products of the televising of football, you know, of all football.
Yeah.
Whereas Pelé predated that, really, you know. So that, you know, I remember when 1966 World Cup took place, you know, he was obviously here, you know, but you were watching that in black and white. You know, you weren't seeing the full glory of that stuff. Do you remember those big spectacular films that they used to put out after every major sporting event, after every Olympics every 4 years, or every World Cup?
Well, the ones you could see in the cinema.
In the cinema.
Yeah, I remember them.
And these things in glowing colour, where suddenly the match looked absolutely magical, you know. So, so he was a kind of product of cinema, I think, you know. Yes. Cinema was how I saw him mainly, really. As opposed to the players who came later.
And you knew very little about him as an individual. You just saw him as a player. And, you know, it was his skill on the pitch is what it was all about.
Absolutely amazing. I've also been reading Two Brothers, which is a new Jonathan Wilson book about Bobby and Jackie Charlton, about the days when footballers went to play football instead of going down the mines. It's a very different world. And being reminded of the night when England won the World Cup in 1966 and Jack Charlton had £100 in his pocket, which had been given to him by the manufacturers of his boots for wearing the boots in the final. And it was more money than he ever had in his pocket in his life. And his wife wasn't there, and he was just determined to spend it.
Fantastic.
So he spent the night, you know, tearing a strip through the West End with a football journalist, and ended up.
But with £100, that still would have taken quite a long time, actually.
It took a long time. Also, people were buying him drinks and so forth. But he ended up spending the night at the home of this football journalist in where? Not Mayfair, not Hampstead, not Pimlico, not Chelsea, Leytonstone.
No.
Leytonstone. Now, no disrespect to Leytonstone, but I don't think a World Cup winner nowadays would be dossing down in Leytonstone.
They would not.
Anyway, you know, that's a reminder of a bygone era of football. What are we talking about? It's the Word Podcast. Here we are. It's first one since Christmas. Did you have a nice Christmas, Mark?
I had a pretty good Christmas. Yeah, it was nice, actually. We had some non-attendance, sadly, of one of the kids who couldn't make it in the end from abroad for reasons involving his girlfriend's dad being a bit poorly. But otherwise, no, really good. We had a lovely time. It was excellent, you know, and lots of people over, and fair number of mince pies consumed, a lot of Stilton. It was just ace, actually.
And I suppose you're looking forward to, you know, you and the lady wife going clubbing on New Year's Eve, as you generally do. Coming over with the milk.
I'm a great enthusiast on the quiet New Year's Eve, actually. No pressure.
I love a quiet New Year's Eve.
I know.
I love a quiet New Year's Eve. And my wife and I were planning a quiet New Year's Eve until our friend rang us the other day and said, "Why don't you come round?" And we thought, all right, we'll do it. It's
They're probably listening to this, Dave.
No, it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Well.
But I can't pretend that I didn't have my sights set on a rather quieter occasion, you know. But it won't be too riotous. Don't worry.
That's nice.
So at this time of year, we're talking about records coming out at this time of year. either now or in the past, were we not?
Yeah, we were.
And I was trying to remember. Clive Banks, who was in the 70s and the 80s, the kind of the doyen of record pluggers in the United Kingdom. And Clive used to kind of plug and promote, records, the Elvis Costello records and Nick Lowe records and Pretenders records and so forth. And Clive always used to be a big believer in records coming out just after Christmas, because really good reason this. Because if you're Radio 1 or Capital Radio or whatever, you're sick to death of the Christmas playlist, the stuff that you've had in the run-up to Christmas.
You want something new.
You want something new. And
also, less records are selling, aren't there? So you've got more of a chance of having a hit.
Absolutely. It takes fewer copies to get a hit. And it's easier to get it on a playlist, and the radio stations are crazy for novelty, So they say, here it is, the new single by the Pretenders or whatever. And so
Pretenders, who did very well in January 1980. Do you remember? Because they just got an album out. They was having hit after hit, weren't they? Because there was nothing else around, really.
Well, Clive used to do their plugging, which is probably no coincidence.
Yeah.
And it's funny if you look back at the history of release dates. Nowadays, if they want to, it's different, obviously it's different because it's streaming and it's all this kind of thing. But for years, even in the days of physical product, if you wanted something to be a hit for Christmas, you put it out no later than October, really, because that's the time you needed to kind of get it in the shops, get it manufactured, get ahead of steam. And I think I'm right in saying that David Bowie's Hunky Dory came out in 1971, just like 3 days before Christmas.
That's right.
And I don't know whether that was just late for Christmas or they're trying to get it early for New Year.
Genius thing. I think Queen did the same thing with The Day at the Races, that the week between Christmas and New Year. And Van Halen did it, I think, with 1984. I think, which came out on January the 6th. I mean, it's just a really clever, Black Sabbath as well, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. It's just a really clever ruse, isn't it?
Didn't work with Hunky Dory. Didn't work. Didn't chart in any shape or form.
No, it didn't actually, did it?
Absolutely
had to have another crack at it. Yeah, that's true.
Well, it didn't happen until years later with Hunky Dory, because following year you had Ziggy Stardust and, Starman and all that sort of stuff. And all that.
Greetings from Asbury Park?
That came out when?
Didn't it? So it came out January the 3rd, I think.
January the 3rd, 1973. Yeah. It's probably also, if you're a record company, it was a way to get it noticed, or it wasn't being overshadowed by a new album by Paul Simon or Santana or whoever else it might have been. But the record business at Christmas was a very particular thing. Although it's interesting, I went into the West End of London a few times in the couple of weeks before Christmas. And I don't know if you did, but it was busy.
It was. It was rammed.
Absolutely really was rammed.
It was.
As if people were just craving kind of human contact, Because presumably a lot of that stuff they could just buy online.
But also for the last 2 years, that's all gone, isn't it? There are people really getting quite excited about seeing the lights, all that kind of stuff. Amazing.
Well, I get excited about seeing the lights. I posted my traditional, Twitter or Instagram picture of when the lights first went up in, Lower Regent Street or wherever. And I always think it looks rather nice. If you're in the West End in a sort of later winter evening, it's getting towards 4 o'clock, so it hasn't got dark yet, but it's sort of dark enough for them to put the lights on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love that look.
It's quite magical.
London looks magical to me.
It does.
And I posted this picture, and people, honestly, if you post anything on social media, you would have thought the most innocent thing in the world is a picture of Christmas light going, oh, Christmas lights are up at Oxford Street or whatever.
Everyone goes, oh.
Most people do. That's lovely. And then, but also somebody goes, oh, they've still got those lights, have they? They've had those for 3 years. I thought, oh, my God's sake, let's just,
Such is the nature of social media. The killjoys are waiting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know.
Do you remember the year that Oxford Street, or was it Regent Street? Yeah, probably Oxford Street. And probably around about the time you and I were both working at Oxford Street. Do you remember when they had sponsored Christmas lights? Do you remember this?
Yes.
Sponsored by, do you remember?
Well, there was something like, was it Coca-Cola? It was somebody like that, wasn't it?
Well, I think Coca-Cola did it as well. Possibly did it later. But I'll tell you who did it. Tango.
Tango, that's right. Tango.
Do you remember? Tango branding all the way down Oxford Street.
And wasn't there a lot of complaints? People saying this is not very
It was
festive.
not festive.
And it wasn't at all.
Because, I know people have to make a living in all kinds of ways, but, when you think of Christmas, you don't think of Tango.
No.
Win Carnis, possibly, Dubonnet, but not Tango.
Baileys.
Baileys.
Sponsored by Baileys. We find a cream sherry or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, absolutely.
That would be
sherry.
fine. Then we'd allow that. Oh, God.
But
that was around the time, wasn't it, that we were on Smash Hits, and you were looking at it too, weren't you? The old issue of Smash Hits.
Right.
Did you have a look?
Yeah.
From 1983, the January the 6th issue, and I had a look at it. I thought it was rather fantastic. Everybody always thinks that Smash Hits, that we always put John Taylor on the cover with no shirt, standing by a swimming pool in Los Angeles, but no. Here is a man in his late 30s wearing an absurd hat who would be largely unknown to the readers and giving what is effectively a kind of lecture on the state of pop music. And Neil Tennant,
who is that person, Mark Allen?
It's Malcolm McLaren. And Neil Tennant interviews him. Neil, obviously being a member of staff at the time, pre-Pet Shop Boys. And he's so sweet. He says, from what I'd heard about him, I was expecting to meet a bit of a loony. But I found him instead to be a man with the manner of an inspired teacher, talking a great deal of sense. See what you think. And he kind of asks him, basically, what's wrong, to make a State of the Nation address about what's wrong with pop music. So interesting, he talks about the whole principle of making new music from existing records, i.e. scratching, explains what scratching is. We were ahead of the game, I think, weren't we? And how English people think with their heads. He says, in America, they think with their hips. He's talking principally about dance music and soul and linking back to Black American, African heritage. And he'd been to Africa and Dominican Republic and stuff, looking for rhythms to use on duck rock. And the whole thing is about injecting kind of African rhythms into pop music. There's a lovely bit where he says, groups like ABC and Haircut 100 have got so far from the source of this magic that they're just something to be purchased like wallpaper or a piece of clothing. It's really interesting. And we make the point. I think you're the editor this time, David. I think you wrote this headline. You said, so is there no such thing as a finished record? It's a really nice idea.
There's
thought that was good.
Prescient thought.
Yeah, no such thing as a finished record.
God, was I really that wise? No,
I think that was you.
That's 40 years ago. And that's true. Because I often write that nowadays. There is no such thing as a... Oh, yeah, I read... In my book about Abbey Road, I'd said that, nowadays, records used to be made once for all. They're not anymore. They're made, well, what do they say? There's no such thing as a mix that's finalized. It's just a mix abandoned.
It's been abandoned and it's about to be updated or whatever.
It's had to be updated.
No, it's really good. There's a little piece about how I Feel Love was remixed from the 77 version to the 82 version. There's dub versions of reggae hits, obviously, and there's Martin Rushington remixed Dare to make Love and Dancing. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Another series of sales. Yeah, so the whole thing is about the whole world of just using music that already exists and adapting it. I thought it's really prophetic, actually. What's actually
it's certainly prophetic.
1983 is entirely the foundation of what's going on now.
Yeah,
it's absolutely fantastic.
That's true.
It's a good issue. Little quiz in there too. Do you want some of the quiz questions?
Go on. I'll see if I can do it. I probably set it. No, did I? I
set it? Which albums in 1982? Which album covers featured a sinking ship? Remember that? Women and Captains First by Captain Sensible. Right. A singer on a rock dressed as a pixie.
No, I'll give in.
Toya. A group lying on a bed of leaves.
Oh, that's Haircut 100.
That is Haircut 100, that's right. An outdoor living room, which is Madness, The Rise and Fall.
Rise and Fall.
And Plastic Dummies sitting around a table.
But any number of albums.
Yeah, any number. That was Upstairs at Eric's by Yazoo.
So,
yeah. It's very good.
40
and there's another
years
classic.
ago.
It's 40 years. There's another classic kind of thing that you would do when it was a holiday issue and you didn't want to come back to work between Christmas and New Year. It's school reports.
It's
so good. So you get Captain Sensible's school report from Stanley Technical School in Norwood. Raymond works best under supervision. That's good, isn't it?
Technical school.
Taylor from Our Lady of the Wayside School in Solihull, who gets V good for punctuality. He's very disappointed. She's terribly well behaved. Karen of Bananarama excels at needlework, and Mary Wilson at the Wickham Primary spends more time in class leading others astray than learning.
No, that doesn't surprise me at all. It's amazing that. Go back to the Captain Sensible thing. So what do you say? The technical school. And so that's in the 1950s, isn't it? It must be.
What, the technical school?
Well, when Captain Sensible must have gone to school in the 50s.
Well, he was born in 1954, so
just about.
I think he was. I think I kind of remember that because I interviewed him.
Yes, it's a very old world of education, isn't it? It's like born from Bananarama, it's needlework.
I know needlework, exactly.
The days of needlework and metalwork.
Yeah,
domestic science. And
lots of. It's just basic manual skills, which was.
It is. It is.
It's not just PPE
it's not media studies, is it?
Not media studies.
It's not music and movements, is it? None of that kind of stuff. I say, I was looking at this issue, Mark, and I think we've slipped up here, or I haven't discussed this with you. It says the singles page. I can't say who reviewed the singles. Can you?
I noticed that, but I can tell from reading them that it was me. I know immediately that it was me. There's no name on the singles review, and I can't remember being remotely upset that it was left off there, but I know.
Just a mistake.
Hell, my terrible turns of phrase. Superbly crafted reworking of the Boomtown Rats' House on Fire rhythm, topped off with hippie flutes.
And sung by an Australian so indebted to Sting, he even nicks his fake Jamaican accent.
Now that's just me. It's just so inescapably me. I was a bit embarrassed by that. Which is opposite. It's opposite the fan club thing. This is very funny.
Out of those singles, I don't think there's anything, and I'm just going down them.
Yeah.
Tracy Thorn, Goodbye Joe, Strangler's European Female, The Box, No Time for Talk, Level 42, The Chinese Way, John Cougar, Hard to Hold On To, Nasty Facts, Marvin Gaye, My Love Is Waiting, Bumble and the Bees, Peter Gabriel, I Have the Touch, the Blockheads, Twist and Shout. Men at Work, Men at Work Down Under. The only one off the page that turned out to be a huge hit. Huge hit. Enormous hit. Down
Is that because I didn't choose the right ones, or because it's that time of year? Maybe it's just that time.
Yeah, it was just. I
love the way it's so kind of high-handed. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Scorpio. I said woefully limp follow-up to the message.
Well, it probably was.
It probably was.
You can't follow the message.
The Killjoys.
I love the fan club direct. We published the Smash Hits fan club directory. And I love the actual postal addresses.
So do I.
Clubs. So
I was looking at those.
If you want at 2 Sheep Street, Highworth, Swindon, Wiltshire, you could find the fan club, ladies and gentlemen, of Abba.
Abba. All right, you got it. Here's one for you, right? 46 Pembridge Road, London W11. Very posh.
That sounds a bit Roxy music.
It's Queen. It's CO Vicky. It's Queen. And 429B in Bury New Road, Salford 7, Lancashire.
Go on.
The Fall. A perfect kind of class divide there.
This is a good game.
It's a good game. Yeah, that is, isn't it?
St Anne's Court, 17 St Anne's Court, Wardour Street, London W1. That is St Anne's Court, which is still there, which is where Trident Studios used to be.
Yeah.
Where David Bowie made all his legendary London records, Queen made Elton John, all these people. That was Soft Cell's fan club. And how about this, Mark? Bull Hill Cottage.
I'm just looking at that.
Near Bury St
Edmunds, Suffolk. It's Shakin' Stevens.
Shaky. That's how you got left as Shaky.
Here's one more for you. The Intergalactic Ranch House, 44 Seymour Place, W1.
Was the place that you correspond with Toyah.
It's Toyah. Isn't that amazing? It's hilarious. don't know why that's so revealing. It just is.
And in those days, if you wanted to be a member of the Pink Floyd fan club, you had to write to William Elsing, Lep and Lam. It's somewhere in Holland.
Yeah, that's right.
Some place in Holland I've never heard of.
Yeah,
it's absolutely extraordinary. So that smash hits.
Great issue.
From 40 years ago, this very week. It's too late to enter the competition.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
You sent me a little clip of, I guess, probably recorded maybe about 18 years ago, of Jim Morrison's sister and Jim Morrison's dad talking about Jim Morrison. And I thought it was very, very affecting, actually. It was very moving.
It was very touching, really.
Because, you know, Jim Morrison, they absolutely loved him. He was a very bright, very accelerated, very focused, quite academic type. He left school and he wanted then to be given as a present the complete works of Nietzsche. He read absolutely everything. He would discover a new word, age 6 or 7, and would then write an entire story based around that new word. So he loved going to his grandmother's house because she had a library. He was obviously very literary, and his father thought he was going to have some kind of academic or just reasonably conventional career. And then his dad talks about him ringing him up and saying, "I've joined a rock group." And he said, he used the word flabbergasted.
He said, "You're making a mistake."
He said, "You're making a mistake." He said, "That is not a job. He said, get a proper job." He said, "You're on the wrong track." And then he later had to concede that his son was an entertainer. He said he wasn't a singer, but he could concede that he was an entertainer. He was very touched eventually that, you know, he was buried in Père Lachaise and, you know, so many people loved him. But I felt the suffering that family went through, because what happened was that his father was the commander, wasn't he, of an aircraft carrier in the US Navy, involved in various campaigns in the mid-60s, which against, you know, Vietnamese motor torpedo boats, etc., which accelerated America's involvement in the Vietnam War. And so Jim Morrison decided that he was going to cut all ties with his family, to the extent when he was asked in an interview once, you know, about his family, he said they'd all died, didn't he? You remember? He said his siblings, that's right, and his family. Can you imagine reading that about, you know, delivered by your own son? And it struck me that it would have been extraordinarily hard. I think he's one of those cases of someone who, in the age of social media, could not really have got a foothold. Here was the great countercultural hero whose father was eventually finished up being the admiral, wasn't he?
He was rear admiral. He was a rear admiral. He was very senior U.S. Navy.
Hugely senior, responsible for, you know, at the absolute heart of the naval contribution to the Vietnam War. And what would he have had to do? He would, in the days of social media, there would have been no secret. He would have to have, I don't know, denounced his father. He would have to have campaigned against him, or I don't know. But it would have been incredibly damning, don't you think?
Well, yeah, I think it's impossible to imagine really how any of these things would have happened in the age of social media, because it's just so different. I tell you, the thing that struck me was I just watching it, because they're really. And just, you can find this on YouTube. It's just Jim Morrison's father and sister talk about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, as you say, it was done more than 10 years ago or whatever, because his father's dead now. They're just talking about, you know, their son or their brother who they loved and miss. And then they're talking about the person they knew.
Yeah.
And
completely unlike the person that you know.
They're completely unlike the person. And that's the thing. It made me reflect on loads of things. You know, that it made me think, boy, you could do quite a good documentary film. Just pull together all the interviews that the legends, parents of legendary rock stars have done over the years, and just put them together. Because now, when you know, if you'd watched those kind of interviews when you were 19 or 20, you would have been entirely on Jim's side.
Yeah, and now you've
you watch
allegiance.
You're entirely on the parents.
I think, how could they have dealt with it?
Possibly.
His mother went to one of his shows once with his brother, I think, and Jim wouldn't see them. Can you imagine
the heartbreak that they had to go through?
Unbelievable.
And it's also the great truth that you know yourself as a parent, that you know your children. You know them from when they're like 2 years old.
So when they're putting on some kind of kind of front. It's a deceit.
Yeah, and to see them put on a front, which then fools loads of people who don't know them.
Yeah,
must be kind of frustrating.
Absolutely.
And so Morrison's father was saying, I had to accept that people loved him and respected him, and I had to accept their respect, even though he couldn't understand it himself at all.
And again, that's another interesting thing, because that generation now, obviously, you could at least understand the context of what your son or daughter was doing, because you've grown up in a world where there was rock and roll music. But then you couldn't. He just simply had no idea what world his son was in. No. The way he looked, what he sang about, the way he acted.
And he also was in the military, so as he says himself, he wasn't there for most of the time. So he missed half of his growing up. But his sister is no less. That's no less affecting.
I felt for her, because she's 2 or 3 years younger than him, and so she would have been, in her late teens, early 20s when he was at the absolute top of his game. Can you imagine that? Because everyone would have known that you were Jim Morrison's sister. And in fact, she looked extraordinarily like him, actually, didn't she? Really fabulously handsome looking character. And, to know that you were his sister and yet had no contact with him would be heartbreaking. Amazing.
Yeah, so it's worth seeing. We'll try and post the link to it underneath this. Talking of the 60s, the bus theory, Mark.
Oh, the bus theory. Very good. One of our listeners called Arthur Scooten sent in a kind of like a little essay that he wrote, didn't he? Making various points. And one is pointing up the enormous importance and the central role played by the bus
in the 1960s.
In pop history. And
in the 1960s is what he's talking about.
In the 1960s, that's right. And he made some really good point. He talks about, obviously, the development of the bus through from 1955 and kind of the whole idea of early bus travel for the youth, But one of the key things he talks about is Cliff Richard. And it's quite interesting because he says Cliff Richard's Summer Holiday came out in 1963. So the general theme is these are adventurous youth kind of traveling together and having adventures, aren't they, in a kind of community. And he said that he thought that must have been seen by Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters.
And taken up by that.
Same thing a year later, which I thought was actually entirely likely, although extraordinary. How could they not have seen it?
It made me think back to Summer Holiday, which is obviously the Cliff Richard thing. And it reminded me that film starts in black and white. Yeah. And then it turns into colour.
Yeah.
In the kind of bus garage. And I think they shot this, I think I'm right in saying, I think they shot it not far from where I live in Elstree, which was a bus garage.
Yeah.
And of course, Cliff, and the Shadows, and they all came from, the home counties. They all came from, Hertfordshire. Shadows didn't. They came from Newcastle, but they'd been living in London at the time. And I can remember watching this thing up in the north of England at the time and thinking, wow, that looks glamorous. Because the thing was, when you came to the south of England, I don't know if people used to think this. I always used to think it. You come down to the south of England, the weather is slightly better. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's slightly warmer. It's slightly less likely to be less rain. And so the south of England, even the Elstree bus garage, looked to me in pinched Yorkshire in 1963 like the west coast of the United States. and so it seemed entirely plausible that Cliff and all his dancing mates would spring about aboard this, whatever it was, a route master.
It was, I think. It was all
and then set off across Europe. But also he makes the point that, isn't it one of the where they encounter kind of mime troops, don't they? And all sorts of their things that later turn up in Ken Kesey's, Merry Pranksters and all that kind of stuff.
That's right.
and then he's later resurfaces in Magical Mystery Tour.
Magical Mystery Tour. I mean, there's various other things. The Magic Bus, the Who as well.
The Who is Magic Bus.
Magic Bus.
Buses in the 60s. I'm sorry, Arthur. I think you've hit a seam here.
Well, there is a seam. I was thinking about America by Paul Simon.
Buses in.
Kathy, I said, we boarded the Greyhound to Pittsburgh.
And empty and aching, and I don't know why. Counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike. Now, have you ever done this, Mark? You must have. In your life, gone on the New Jersey Turnpike.
Oh yeah, what do you think of?
Have you in that journey sat in the back of a car and gone 1, 2, 3? You have. You have.
Compulsory.
I have. You've got to do it. You've simply
it's like
got
Lexington 125. It's just these certain places that you have to go and do these things.
So buses, yes, and
Day in the Life. Lay the bus in seconds flat.
Oh God, yeah. And of course the Graduate.
Yes,
the Graduate at the end. Where he escapes with his sweetheart on a bus, doesn't he?
Yeah.
They take the bus to get away from the wedding ceremony, and
with that wonderful shot where they're sitting at the back of the bus, and it's shot up the aisle, and the whole of all the bus passengers have turned around to look at them. It's extraordinary. Yes. Absolutely.
Midnight Cowboy starts on a bus, ends on a bus. Starts with Joe Buck or whatever he's called, getting on the bus, jacketing the job at the diner, and getting on the Greyhound bus to go to New York, and then ends up with him and Ratso Rizzo, trying to stay alive until he gets to Florida.
But McCartney did the same thing, didn't he? And I think in 1972 Wings toured Europe in an open top bus.
Well, when Wings, I don't know about open top, but when Wings first toured, which must have been late 71 or early 72.
Yeah.
And he was just basically, the idea was, I don't want to set up a tour. We're just going to get in a bus and we're going to go to universities. We're going to turn up and say, do you want us to play? Yeah. And they did that a few times, didn't they?
Yeah.
I don't know if it'd be open top, surely not.
No, there was an open top bus in Europe. They had an open top bus, a picture of it. I think so, with little mattresses and things on the top of it. Pretty sure.
So buses in pop music in the 60s, were they transformational? Ladies and gentlemen, discuss.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
I want to address this to Mark Stevens. Mark Stevens is one of our valued Patreon supporters who got in touch via the Patreon page and says, after 2 years of listening to The Boys, that's you and me, Mark.
Oh, The Boys. I'm rather flattered by that.
And loving every chat. Surely can't have loved every chat. We do talk an awful lot of rubbish.
Profound bollocks. But yeah, go on.
He's reached a breaking point, Mark. I finally have to disagree on a point.
Go on.
He says, West Wing is amazing, and I've watched it over and over. Now,
all we said was you wouldn't want to watch it more than once.
All I said was you probably wouldn't want to watch it more than once. And because I've never watched it more than once. You're at the moment in the process.
Yeah, and we're watching it for the first time.
But you may go back. And I just wanted to say, it really doesn't matter what I think. It really doesn't matter what either of us think at all. It's just an opinion.
It doesn't. But it's so funny how, again, it's social media, isn't it? Social media is about surrounding yourself with a load of people who you're going to agree with, and which shores up your own personal beliefs. And the moment somebody steps out of line and says something you don't agree with, you get really upset.
Well, except I sort of don't. I don't for years. I've worked with loads of people that I don't agree with at all. And it doesn't cost me any moments.
No, but you're different. I'm talking about the major users of Twitter are often very like this, aren't they? They just can't deal with somebody who has an opposing viewpoint.
Well, I'm not suggesting that that's the case with Mark at all, but I think it's an interesting facet of modern life.
Yes, it is.
The people kind of look for dividing lines, really, And the only thought I've ever had, and I suppose this is working in magazines, where you're trying to orchestrate loads of opinions, aren't you? You want a symphony full of opinions.
A forum for debate.
You don't want the same opinions at all.
Don't.
It's the easiest thing in the world.
It's the whole point of columnists.
What you want is interesting opinions, provocative opinions, different opinions. That's absolutely fine. The same thing is kind of neither here nor there. But anyway, nice to hear from you, Mark. And don't be disturbed if I said something this week that causes you, to tear your hair out. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Take no notice.
It's just me moving the air around.
Two old blokes just waffling on,
chuntering.
Somebody else said a thing about when we. Who was that? When did we start talking about old records as though they were like old books?
Well, I'm going to have to try and find. I didn't say this myself, but somebody else did, and I can't find the original thing off the top of my head.
Don't worry.
But basically, somebody said they wanted to know when people started talking about old records as though they were old books, and started talking about first pressings and imprints. Which is a very book publishing term, isn't it?
It is.
The record label is an imprint. And I think it's an interesting point as to when did people start doing this? Because I think it's quite recently that they started.
Do you think it's to do with Discogs? I think it probably is. I think it's to do with the value, because people stopped kind of looking at records as just, this is an interesting record, you ought to listen to it. I started talking about it, this is a really valuable record and you should buy it. And so the idea that it's a first pressing, to own a first pressing, has a certain cachet, doesn't it? And also the indication that you might have been a very early adopter of this group, I suppose.
But I don't think it is. I don't think it is that. But I think you're right about Discogs. I'm sure you're right about Discogs.
Yeah.
Because there are people who spend their lives on Discogs, and I can well imagine it. It's a fantastic site, really. It's only relatively recently I've looked at it and thought, my God, there's some information in here.
Yeah.
But if people are saying, I've got a kind of first pressing of The Hangman's Beautiful Daughter, and I don't think they're necessarily indicating that they've had it since 1967 or whatever it was that came out. They're just, it's like finding a kind of an antique, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the first edition for P.G. Woodhouse or something,
finding a lovely, an Adam chair or something that is broken or isn't scratched or anything like that. Because if you've got, I speak as somebody who, over in the corner of that room, have a lot of records, many of which could reasonably be described as first pressings, okay? And I tell you, most of them, you wouldn't want to listen to them because of the condition that
No, that's the other thing, is that first pressings don't sound very good often.
Well, if they've been played for 40, 50 years, they probably won't.
Yeah.
What people want is a first pressing that's somehow pristine at the same time,
unplayed.
But it's also that imprint is another, so they start talking about Blue Note or Stax as an imprint, not a label, And I suppose it just indicates that collecting records is the new collecting books, isn't it? It's just, except it's bigger. It's more widespread. There's more people fancying having a go at it,
Yeah, come and look at my library.
Yes.
It's that, isn't it?
And of course, this time of year, we had the traditional silly season, Christmas silly season reprise of the old story of vinyl's making a comeback.
I know, with Taylor Swift, wasn't it?
Yes.
Taylor Swift sold more on vinyl she has on CD. Well, I'm not at all surprised.
Well, except my piece of advice to anybody looking at these stories, and I'm sure we've all looked at them, you've got to watch for the bit in the story where the journalist makes a switch. They go from talking about numbers of CDs sold to the amount of money in LPs sold. They never compare oranges with oranges because that simply will not work in their case at all. They basically say, in the past, there were, 50 million CDs sold. Now you get 50 million quid's worth of LPs. Yeah. Well, the difference is LPs are £25 each. That's how it works. So it's like you could probably, it struck me the other day, you could probably do something quite similar with the newspaper trade. Because how much is a copy of The Guardian if you bought it nowadays?
Oh, it's really expensive. £2.5 £3 on Saturdays. I can't remember. It's a lot.
Okay. So if you added up, circulation income for newspapers, you probably find that it's more than it was in the days when newspapers sold thousands and thousands of copies because they're charging more money for them,
Yeah.
But anyway, the kind of news media never get tired of it, do they? The old vinyls coming back.
I know, because everyone has a romantic attachment to the idea of it. And
well, let me ask you a question. When did you last go in a home, Mark, apart from mine, where they had a working record player?
Well, I do know a couple of people who don't use them very often, but they're there and they're very prominently displayed. But no, I mean, the sad thing now is that you don't get to see people's record collections because the people who do collect lots of records don't have them in the living room, obviously, because there's just too many of them. So you don't normally used to be able to go into living rooms and just browse through immediately what people had, which I used to absolutely love, But,
you ever used to do that thing where you used to take out records and a massive, the late 60s, early 70s, a massive record collection was 100.
Oh, 100, yeah.
That was massive. It was mind-boggling.
Oh, yeah.
And you'd go along the spines and you go, oh, crikey, the Flying Burrito Brothers or whatever. You'd only heard about these things.
I know.
And you'd pull them out and you'd put them down, you'd put them in front. And then you'd make a little sub-pile of about 6. And you'd be hoping against hope that the owner would say, do you want to borrow those?
Yeah.
Those 6.
You want to put one on. Yeah.
Oh, well, do you want to borrow them? Is what you really wanted to do.
Yeah.
You didn't just want to listen to them once. You wanted to listen to a few times, didn't you? And it did happen occasionally. But yeah, I can remember how enthralled I used to be when you go to the house of somebody and you notice that there were 50 LPs in the corner. And, the likelihood is that they would have amongst them something you'd never actually seen at all.
It's quite often you'd have kind of quite standard gear, but a huge record collection, or very, very, very expensive record playing equipment, and only about 4 albums. You know what I mean? There were just people who just loved the idea of high fidelity, but not particularly record collectors.
Well, I think now, I mean, if you take all those people who bought those Taylor Swift records, and I'm sure there a lot of people have done, how many of those people have got a record player?
Oh, right. So they just bought them just to stick them up on a shelf. I guess they probably have.
Must be.
Yeah.
The Word Podcast. What's wrong with being sexy?
Any other business? We're joined by young Alex Gold, who's got something to add to the previous conversation. Yes, Alex?
I do. I was listening in on, obviously, because that's what I'm here for.
Let's hope you are.
It's all the chat about keeping records for display. And I've got a bunch of vinyl that I've acquired over the years and never ever play because I have nothing to play vinyl on, including... So in 2012, I think, I went to Sweden. A friend of mine has a club night there, and it's Europe's, I think, longest running Northern Soul night. It was going for 20 years previously. He's a Swedish guy called Fred. He's a mod to the extent that when he introduces himself to people,
Swedish mod called Fred. I love it.
He'll introduce himself to people and go, "Hello, I'm Fred. I'm a mod." That's how he introduces himself. But Fred is also the CEO of Cosmos Music Group, which is, I suppose, Scandinavia's beggars group. So they're technically independent, but they're major size. So, and they used to do all Oasis's stuff over there. And I went to visit their office as well. And he gave me this, which is a box set of Oasis's final album, Dig Out Your Soul. As you can see, it's a hefty old number.
Wow. That's a box set of just that one album.
Yep, I've never.
So is that all outtakes and?
I've got no idea, Mark, because I've never opened it. I've had it for 10 years.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are.
Why don't you open it live?
No, I don't think we've been asking him to do that. No.
If you want me to open it, I'll open it.
Before you open it, we can all just share in the joy of an unopened record.
Yeah, I like to look at it. I like to look at it.
Do you ever, Alex, and if you've never done it, I'm going to get you to do it now. Mm-hmm. Do you ever rub it against your cheek?
I don't actually.
Go on, do it now. Do it now.
Oh, it's funny.
It's soothing.
Isn't that lovely?
I feel like everything's going to be all right, Dave.
That's very good.
I love the feeling of shrink wrap in the morning. There's nothing like it. For an old record shop head, nothing like shrink wrap. Nothing at all.
Do you want me to
That's
open
lovely.
it?
You're going to open it?
I'm going to open it. I've had this for a whole full decade this year.
Well, won't it devalue it? I'm feeling bad I suggested that now.
It's dig out your soul. I don't think there's much value in this.
Oh,
anyway.
Alex, can I just... And, nobody
Probably
is more
is.
disrespectful of Oasis than I am. But anything in a shrink wrap is worth 10 times more.
Don't open it.
Thing.
Magic, don't open it, seriously.
Oh, definitely. Fact.
No, you'd be crazy.
okay.
No,
I'm not
don't
gonna
worry.
open it.
Sorry, viewers.
No.
Sorry, listeners. What we're going to assume is a big fat book in there, a lot of outtakes, and some bits of memorabilia.
Yeah.
God. Wow.
So there we are.
So, you're not going to put that on Amazon, on eBay.
No, I just like to have it around. I just like to look at it. I like to just know it's like having the extra pack of biscuits in the cupboard. You don't necessarily need to use them, but it's nice to know
You
they're
want to know they're there.
The extra pack of
Very
biscuits.
comforting.
Very good. Do we have any new Patreon supporters that we ought to be welcoming to the massive, Alex?
We have a triumvirate today.
A triumvirate. Very good.
Yes.
We're always pleased to welcome new people to the magic circle.
They are Michael McAleer.
Michael McAleer. Excellent. Very good to have you here, Michael.
Very nice to have him on board. Superb.
Yeah. Next.
Mysterious monosyllabic Maz.
Maz. Just Maz.
Just Maz.
Just Maz.
Okay.
And
fine.
Is that a Martin, do you think, Maz?
Oh, gosh.
Could be.
Mabel? I don't know.
Yeah.
Marie? Who knows?
Marie?
And also Ali Douglas, who is an annual patron. And, of course, when you subscribe annually, you get 15% off. So
Right.
Very nice.
Hello.
work.
Well, welcome all of them. And if anybody else would like to join, we'd welcome you no less. What are the many benefits of being a Patreon supporter, Alex? Just recap those ones one more time for us.
Well, so there are various tiers of membership according to your situation or what you fancy. So there's the quiz tier membership,
which is every Friday at 6 o'clock, folks. And very, very entertaining. And there's a prize once a month as well.
We do it on Zoom, and it's every week in, every week out, without fail.
And actually, I should just point this out. I don't know if I pointed this out, but you don't have to take part. You can just come and watch.
Absolutely.
Get in, absolutely.
So don't worry about being exposed to a level of competition that you can't live with or whatever. You can come along and just, look.
It's a safe place. It's a safe place.
Yeah.
It's a safe space. Yes.
And also, you get a mention on our Word in Your Ear Patreon Hall of Fame on our website as well. So you'll get your name
nothing wrong with
tattooed on there. And then there is the podcast tier membership, where you get the weekly Word podcast, i.e. what we're doing right now, early, and also ad-free, if that tickles your pickle. Above that is...
Tickles your pickle.
It's a videocast membership where you get all of our video content, so Word in Your Attic, Word in Your Ear, all that kind of stuff. You get it early as well. And then right at the top of the tree, there is the Clubhouse. Now, the Clubhouse is a very special membership tier because you get your very own personal birthday present from Mark.
You get to live at Mark Allen's house.
Yeah.
What fun. I'll do a house swap with you. Willingly.
So Mark and Dave will come and digitally come around to your house on your birthday and
And you can
rummage
show off your
through-
record collection. You dig out
Absolutely.
your rarities. The records that mean the most.
You get the audio Word in Your Attic, so that's on a Patreon-only podcast feed. And you will also get an invite to our biannual Word in Your Ear get-togethers.
So, all
What's
good
wrong with that?
all good reasons. And the final and most clinching good reason is you'll be helping us doing what is, I'm sure you'll agree, important work.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
Well, it's a birthday top-up special with our very valued patron, Sandra Austin. Sandra wearing a fantastic, what appears to be an Abba hat. Oh, it's gone now.
Put it back on. Put it back on.
Back on.
Yeah,
Abba hat
that's superb
and a
work.
scarf
Abba scarf as well.
So do you buy those at Abba gigs? How do you do?
Yeah, it's official merch from Voyage, from the Abba Voyage thing. So
the knitwear is a big thing with the Abba merch, is it? That's quite interesting, quite telling, isn't it?
Yes.
It is. It's very Scandinavian.
Very Scandi, very indicative of their demographic as well, where, a nice warm woolly scarf comes in very handy.
This is it.
Absolutely.
It's because...
So you've been converted. You were saying one of the things you want to talk about was your conversion to Abba when you were rather begrudgingly because you didn't really like them when you were younger, which I felt exactly the same way. But go on, tell us about that.
Well, I suppose it's growing up. My younger brother, was absolutely fanatical about ABBA. And so we were subjected to ABBA day and night on the record player from various parts of the house, never stopped. So almost as a point of principle, I took a dislike to them, as you do.
Yeah.
And it's only really now as I've got older and I haven't had to listen to them all the time. I've come to appreciate that they're quite good tunes. The songs are good. The lyrics are relatively meaningful. I went to Voyage for my birthday, which is why I'm wearing the hat. And I really enjoyed it. I've grudgingly come to admire them against all of my principles. And the scary thing is, I suppose, I noticed as an adult, and you'd hear an ABBA song on the radio, I knew all the words. I know all the words to all the songs because I've been brainwashed my whole life with this younger brother who has driven me crazy. But now I quite like that I know the words, and I like that I recognize the songs. And I thought that their new album is actually really very good for what they do, for what they do. They're great. And
how was the show? Is it convincing? Everybody who's been to it that we know says it's absolutely fantastic.
It is. I'm surprised that neither of you have been. Have you?
We will eventually. I keep thinking about it.
I fancy it. I must admit, I do fancy it. I mean, I love them too. I mean, I didn't really like them when I was a kid because you just didn't. I didn't appreciate them.
They weren't cool.
I really do now.
They certainly weren't cool. My thing about ABBA is I've always approved of ABBA. I really have. Mm-hmm. But I don't engage with ABBA. You know what I mean? I couldn't tell you a song of theirs that means a lot to me or anything like that. But I always think
moving.
God, they're well, except that I think it's I'd like to just put in one point here, as I think as pop music gets older, it acquires a quality of poignancy.
Oh, yeah, it does.
They didn't have before.
And seeing the four of them together, I find that moving. Seeing pictures of the four of them, I find
think
absolutely
it's amazing.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. Now
they're all still here. They all still look terrific.
Yeah. And I have to say, I disagree with you a little bit, Dave, in that there are a couple of ABBA songs that are really, I think, very moving. There's one that Bjorn wrote about watching his daughter grow up, or just watching her leave for school one morning, and it really hitting him how quickly they grow up and how quickly they'll be gone. And
I wouldn't disagree with you. I'm sure that's true. All I'm saying is I don't really engage with them. I never have done. I probably will at some point, but I never have done. I've just always gone, that's ABBA. ABBA are a really good thing and all that, but I just don't engage with them because you can't engage with all music. But I'm sure you're absolutely right about that.
And that the new one that they brought out, that they launched the album with, which it's just all about, it seems to be all about the fact that they're still here and have survived and have faith in each. I think I still have faith in you, I think is the name of it.
Oh, it's nice.
I love.
Yeah, fair enough.
Oh well, nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Exactly.
Is there anybody else that you can feel yourself thawing as regarding?
That's a good one actually. There's no one that I've been forced to be exposed to this to the same extent. I suppose I would never have been a particularly Dylan is not somebody that I ever really, sorry.
Well, sorry.
No, fair enough, that's good.
But that I have, unlike you, David, with Dylan, I admire what he's done and I've never really engaged very much.
No, okay. Well, it's fair enough, because people always, I get these things saying, people say, well, what should I be listening to? And I always say the same thing. You should listen to exactly what you feel like. Yeah. It's not homework. And particularly music. I think of all the arts, actually, music is the one where it does least good to pursue an interest if you don't feel it. You know what I mean? You can't make yourself
You can't make yourself like stuff.
Because you've got to be emotionally ready for music. That's the thing that matters more.
You may never like it, or you may at some stage of your life coincide with it and it suddenly works, you know.
Yeah. But it could, I mean, there does seem to be, I put it to the jury, I put it to the jury, that there are probably more people in the world nowadays taking Abba seriously, in inverted commas, than there have ever been in the past. Even when they were at their massive 70s peak, people didn't kind of study them to the extent that they do now, which must be very satisfying if you're a member of Abba. That
after all those reviews.
You went through a period in the 80s.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I was looking into this the other day. Not an awful lot happened with Abba in the 80s, did it? They just they went away. I was talking to Jonathan Morishmark about that party you and I went to, that Abba reception where they turned up, and then they broke up pretty much after that.
They did.
Was it the day before you came, which was not a huge hit? And I think they subsequently said, had it been a bigger hit, we might have stayed together. Wow. Anyway, they went off. The Agnetha and Frida went and made their solo records and whatever. And Bjorn and Benny did their chess thing. And then that was your 80s, really. Not an awful lot happening in the 80s with the Abba. No compilations, nothing like that. It only started happening in the 90s with Bjorn again.
Yeah, Mamma Mia, wasn't it, as well? Mamma Mia was suddenly just, everyone thought, actually, we love this stuff.
Well, also, there was, all those kind of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Yes, that whole quiet fan base that seemed to come out of the
It was a gay thing that kind of brought them back, wasn't it?
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, produced by an old friend of ours, Mark, Al Clark.
Oh, yeah.
Only head of press at Virgin. Went
Records.
to Australia and produced Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Very good.
An amazing film, but made even better by Abba. And actually, what was the other one? Muriel's Wedding, another Australian.
This is it.
Yes.
Australians did a load of this stuff because they also did, and I don't know if Abba are on this soundtrack, they did a ballroom dancing movie, which was very big, was it? What the hell?
Ballroom.
Strictly Ballroom.
And I'm pretty sure, they were. They might have been Abba on that.
And that was all Jean-Paul Young and Love is in the Air and all that kind of light pop music was kind of brought back in an Australian context, sun shining, and was suddenly kind of re-embraced by people.
And we were allowed, I think it made it safe to like Abba again then, or you didn't have to be cool. It didn't have to be cool anymore.
But they were probably the first case of this, what I think is now a phenomenon, which is I think you're bigger 40 years later.
It's the same for everybody, isn't it? All those groups that split up, when they were playing Wembley Arena, if they came back now, they'd be playing a succession of Wembley stadiums because all the people who love them then still love them. And they just acquired a whole generation of people.
It just adds people. Absolutely.
In.
So, go on. Having been to see the show, will you be going again?
Well, I have a confession to make. I've actually seen it twice now.
Okay, good.
Because my brother insisted that we go just the week it came out, actually. We went the week it came out, so that's, 6 or 7 months ago. And then we liked it so much. And I have to say, I'm impressed by it. Like, just separate from anything else, the technology is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Apparently, it's astonishing.
You should go just to see and even just the light show, not even... the avatars or whatever, but the light, it's just really well put together. They've obviously thought about the set list. So it's not just greatest hits. It's not like Mamma Mia Live. It's, they've put in random obscure things that the fans are really going to love. So it's for the fans rather than, just the general public. But it hangs really well together. What
kind of random obscure things? You mean tiny little kind of in jokes or
there's songs that would never have made it off albums. So there's like the second song in is a song called Hole in Your Soul, which I don't think was ever anything but a middle of the album track, but it's a good rocker. Or there's a song called When All Is Said and Done, which they wrote as they were breaking up, and it's about...
Yeah, we were talking about it,
And so they've included lots of those. So it's not just... And they've left out lots of big ones like Take a Chance on Me.
Oh, really?
And Super Trooper.
And there's no point shouting for an encore, is there? No, no point holding up a banner.
They're not going to say, all right, we'll do one more.
Just for you, darling.
That's not going to happen. But it's funny. We all know that they're avatars and it's fake. But there's a bit at the end, and I don't want to give too much away, but there's a bit at the end where you see them as they are now, rather than as the avatars. And people burst into tears because they think they're really there. It's like, they're here. They're here.
Oh, no.
It's like, no, they're not. Like, it's a random Saturday afternoon. I don't think they're going to be here. But it's so convincing that you would. So it's a great show. And it's 90 minutes, spot on.
Guaranteed.
Perfect.
Guaranteed. Wall to wall.
Proper concert. Yeah.
All in favour of that.
And you can leave.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
that's so good.
I highly recommend it.
No, I'm sure we will get round to it. We'll get. It's not going anywhere.
No, I don't think it's
here forever.
Although apparently they've only got the lease for 4 years, and then they have to move it. So
they can move it.
I thought they owned the building.
Well, the building is flat pack. It's Scandinavia.
Oh, no.
They could move it. They could move it to Birmingham, or they take it to Dublin.
I think that's what they'll do. I think they'll fold it up. They'll bring it to New York. They'll bring it to.
They will.
They'll bring it to all over the world.
Yeah.
And fleece us all. But it doesn't feel like you're being fleeced. It feels like being good value.
I don't. Well, from what I gather, I don't think they're making a fortune out of it. Yeah, it costs so much, doesn't it?
It's years to pay back, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. And they're being quite. I know I succumbed to the merch and all, but they're actually it's all very low key. The merchandising. There's very little sponsorship. They haven't sold out to things. It's actually quite nice. Really nicely done.
Very good.
Fantastic.
Very
lovely to talk to you.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.